Hello, grade ones. For our next lesson, I have something very special for us. Now, one of my favorite things to do in every school year with my grade one class is to read a special book called Flat Stanley. Now, this is one of my favorite things to do every school year, and I'm very excited that I get to do it with you guys now, even if it's in a little bit of a different way. So every week, we're going to be reading one chapter from our book, and it's going to help us answer some questions about the story, learn about character traits, and so much more. So we're going to be able to do this, and to make sure that we're able to do this online, we want to say thank you to the author, who is Jeff Brown, our illustrator, who is Scott Nash, and our publishers, who are HarperCollins. And we are able to do that with the permission of Access Copyright on behalf of the publishers. So thank you to all those people to allow us to share our story online. And we get to start with our chapter 1. Now, our chapter is going to begin with chapter 1. We have a picture here, and its name is The Big Bulletin Board. Now, let's take some predictions before we start. I see a picture here, and our character has a bit of a surprise face. Our chapter is called The Big Bulletin Board. Let's make some predictions about what you think is going to happen in this chapter. Well, let's find out and see. Breakfast was ready. "I'll go wake the boys," Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their younger son, Arthur, called from the bedroom he shared with his brother, Stanley. "Hey, come and look! Hey!" Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. "Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people," Mr. Lambchop said. "Try to remember that." "Well, excuse me," Arthur said, "but look!" He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it laid an enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys as a Christmas present a few years ago, so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he could still be sleeping if it wasn't for his brother shouting. "What's going on here?" he called out from underneath of the enormous board. Take a look at Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. "Heavens," said Mrs. Lambchop. "Gosh," said Arthur, "Stanley's flat." "As a pancake," Mr. Lambchop said. "That's the craziest thing that I've ever seen." "Well, let's all have breakfast," Mrs. Lambchop said. "Then Stanley and I will go and see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say." In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Does it hurt very much?" "I feel sort of tingly for a while after I got up," Stanley said, "but I feel fine now." Take a look at how flat Stanley is. "Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases," said Dr. Dan. "We'll have to keep an eye on this young fellow," he said when he finished his examination. "Sometimes we doctors, despite all of our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we know." Mrs. Lambchop said that she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by a tailor now. So Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them all down. So boys and girls, that's where our story is stopping for this chapter. As a little preview, next week we will be reading chapter 2, Being Flat. Now take a look at our picture for some predictions. I think Stanley is going to have some fun being flat. So now boys and girls, for this chapter, I have some questions for you. For this chapter, I have a few questions for you. The first question I have is, what happened to Stanley as he slept in his bed? Make sure you tell me with evidence from the book of what happened to him. Number 2 is going to ask, where did his parents take Stanley to get checked out? And the last question, number 3, is going to ask, what does Stanley look like now? So what he looks like has changed from the beginning of our chapter to the end. Use some good descriptor words to let me know how Stanley looks now. To find these questions, you can find them in our link below in our slide, and it's going to bring up a Google form that has these questions in them. If you want to type your answers into the form, that's fine. If you want to write this out with a pencil and a paper, with a whiteboard and a marker, with a chalkboard and some chalk, however you want to write them out, you're able to write out your answers, take a picture of it, and upload it and drop it into our assignments file that you've used previously. Good luck, boys and girls.